Okay, good. Okay, good morning, Ayin Beis, Volume 2. We are on page 1171. Okay. So I actually did some research on this that we discussed yesterday. I'll tell you what I found and what I didn't find. So first, let's sum up what we're learning here. In explaining the two levels of ayin, pnimis hakav and chetzenis hakav, that the kav has two dimensions to it. One is that relates to the structure of existence more, which is the ayin of the yesh hanivra, and one that is more the pnimius and atzmis of Ein Sof within the kav, as it reflects the elokus that goes all the way up lifnei atzimtzum, not just to malchus of Ein Sof, but to teferes hanelam. So that is the ayin of the yesh hamiti. So now we have them both in the kav. To explain this, the Rebbe Rashab is going now to Arichas Habir, which is going to be quite a few pages to the end of this Maimer. A Baruch Kvoid Hashem Mimkeme. What does the Mimkeme mean? What's the Baruch Kvoid Hashem? Baruch, Malchus, is blessed from its place, its Sheirish. Where's the root of Malchus of Ein Sof? Basically. To explain that, he went into a discussion of actualize nivra elam hayahu ushmoi belvad. Hu and shmoi. What is this hu and shmoi? Etzemer and ispashta sa'er. Again, like two levels. One is the divine, the etzem of the divine elokus, oir. And one is its extension and relationship with another. In that itself, there's two levels. One, ispashta in extension, there's, like he said, beis madregas, er kameshu la'atzmei, and the Erikshu Legabizolose as it relates to existence. That's Hu and Shmoi. What then the question is, what is the inyan? He says, what is this Shmoi before the world was created? Because a person on their own doesn't need a name. If the world wasn't created yet, means there's no other, why is there a name? What is the role of this name? And then he explained that lamata, the role of a name, is not just in order another person calls you, but the name actually connects the eris, the neshama and the guf, and in the shtalshlus, eris and kalim. But lamayla, you can't say that. Because in atzmus he says, not lamayla. Lamayla you could say it eris and kalim. But he says, aval batzmuse, I'm just pointing out, aval gab batzmuse is baruch harikolin Hashem urak luzulose. By Atzmuse, you can't talk about connecting Eris and Kelim. There's no Eris and Kelim yet. So the only thing would be a name to call God. Why does God need a name? For us to call him. But if there's no us, what's the purpose of a name? What's the purpose of a name if there's no one calling that name? So we say, we call to the Eibishter. We call him Havaya, Lakim, whatever name we use. And the parenthesis he added, because the only way we can handle how we relate to God was by calling him by his name. We call him and we relate to him. Okay. Then came the Medrash. The next piece, the last piece we learned was this Medrash Bereshis Rabbah, Parsha Yud Zayin. There, Adam Arishan is charged. The Eibishter shows the Malachim. That's what the Medrash talks about, the Chochmah, the superior wisdom of Adam Arishan. That he was the only one that can find the right name, appropriate name for every creature, for every creation. But at the end of that, then comes the Eibishter himself. And the Medrash says, using the words of the Medrash, he said, the Eibishter says, Amalei v'ani mashmi. Now that you named everybody, what about me? The Eibishter, what's my name? Now, obviously, he's not talking about Atzmus because Atzmus doesn't need a name. He's talking about now that you're naming everything in existence. And the name is, like I said before, the channel through which the energy enters that particular creation. And Adam had the wisdom and knew which name fits to which creation. So the Eibishter is saying, now what about my name? How are you going to call me? How are you going to identify me? So he says that Adam Arishan said, to you, no, appropriate, no also means nice. It's nice to call you, but no here doesn't mean obviously beauty. It means more in the term of appropriate. It's fitting, it's befitting, maybe even better than appropriate. It's befitting to call you Havaya. But here's the problem. The next thing he says, what's he say? Lefi sha'ata oden, because you are a master. So the question now is, why does master translate into Havaya? So he should have said, he should have said that no likres adnai lefi sha'ata oden al. Why does he associate Havaya and adnai and oden? That's the obvious question here. How does Hashem Adnai? So why Havaya? Now, initially this seems almost like a tangential, but it's not. It's being negated to the Holy Name, because first of all, it tells us about the name, that the whole purpose is Adam Arishan is calling God a name. Before that, Eibishter didn't have a name. But God didn't say, God could have told Adam, my name, by the way, is so and so. He's saying now that you're naming everybody, everything, what's my name? So it's Adam that gives the name. You see clearly that a name is connected to another. Adam gives the name because before there was a human being, before there was existence, there was no need for a name, which only intensifies the question, what's Hayahu Shmei Bulvad, actually Nivra Elam. But in explaining this medrash, the Rebbe Rashab finds this, the actual pshat that I just said about another in this thing, in this medrash. But, and here's where I went, I did a little research. I wanted to see where else is this explained. So it's actually brought in a number of places in Chassidus. And one place is in Eira Teira, in a few places, Shabbos Shuvah, and in Shabbos Shuvah in one place, and I found another place. Shabbos Shuvah, what was the second place? I think Bahar. Yeah. Discusses this medrash. And there's different explanations. To be honest, I couldn't find the explanation he gives right here. But I'll just telling you what I found so far. So there are different explanations. The Rebbe Rashab is going to reject them. Now, I shouldn't say reject them. He's going to give a different interpretation that fits to our discussion here. So the parentheses we reviewed, I'm going to review it now again, just in review, not necessarily read it all inside. So then he says like this. Okay, so now we have a question on the table. How does Hashem Adnai? So why does he say Havaya and gives the reason because of Odin? In one of them, I actually should have said, he says, it should have said, L'chana likris Havaya al shem shemahava sha'ata mahava elamis. If Adam said it that way, it would have been beautiful. It's appropriate to call Havaya because Havaya means because you create Havaya from Loshem Mahava, you bring into being created worlds. But he doesn't say that. He says Odin. So how does Odin and Havaya work together here? So then the Rebbe Rashab brings V'deichek Lemer, which actually I thought it was the Rebbe Rashab. It's actually the Tzemach Tzedek that says it. It's a language from word for word from the Tzemach Tzedek. He says Deichek Lemer. I can tell you the place if you're interested. I found it yesterday. Let me just see. I don't see it quickly now. Oh, here. Maybe here. Yeah. In Eira Teira Yisrei, page Tuf Lamed Ches, 838, if you want to look it up, in case you're interested. He brings, V'deichek Lemer, he says, exactly the words that the Rebbe Rashab is using here. I'll explain in a moment. I'm just looking up exactly. Okay. Okay. So what does he say? He says, to answer this question, why is Havaya suddenly referred to Oden? How does master connected to Havaya? He says, it's difficult to say that he means here the way you pronounce Havaya. In other words, since you pronounce Havaya Adnai, so he's not talking about Havaya itself, he's talking about how it's pronounced. So that would mean that the Medrash is saying, I'm calling you Havaya, really, I'm calling you Adnai. The pronunciation of the name Havaya. He says, you can't say that. It's difficult to say that because Adam is not talking about pronunciation. He's talking about the actual name. Like he says here. Difficult, Shari. The Medrash is based on the pasuk that says, I, Hashem, is Shmi. That's my name. Shmi shekarali adam rishon. Shmi shekarali adam rishon. So to say it's just a pronunciation issue, he doesn't accept that. Okay, so we have the question on the table. Let me tell you the answer that Rebbe Rashab gives, then I'll go over to the parentheses that we learned. So the Rebbe Rashab says, the answer is based on what we said earlier. Since the whole purpose of a name is for the creation, so they should call God by that name. So what Adam Arishan was saying, since you're an Oden, you're the Oden as in a master, that Shabarasha Elamis, that you created the world, that means you created something other than yourself. Shazel Derech Moshel Kamei Hazulas. So that's exactly what Adam is saying. Since you are now Oden that relates and created another reality, so now Al Kain Shayach Sheyikreischa B'Shem Shehu Havaya. So now I can give you a name. I can give you a name that reflects the fact that you chose to be connected to us. That's what he says. Shuzeh Shmei Yizbarach. Hainu Hagili Min Na'etzem. So in other words, because you're an Odain, that's why we can call you by name, and that name is Havaya.
So Adam is an adjective, not a name at this point.
Right. Oden is reflective of the action of God creating existence. Another. And why Dafka Havaya? In other words, it's not about the name Adnai. He's not meaning Oden. Oden here is coming to tell us that there is an entity that can call you by name. And why do I call you Havaya? Because that's the Shema Etzem. Havaya is the closest name that describes Gili Min Etzem, that reveals that there's a source for existence. So he says, so back to the question, if that's the question, so why is there why is there Shmoi? What's the purpose of this shame before creation and before Adam Arishan, obviously, before he becomes an Oden and creates existence? Now in the parentheses, in attempting to answer this question, he brings from other places. So I could not find, Ubamoki Machari says, I did find it, but it wasn't, I have to do a little more research. He says that why is Havaya called B'Shem Adnai? Because it's referring to how Havaya is being nimshech into Adnai. Shem Havaya into Malchus, which would explain Baruch Kved Hashem Emkei Mei. Now, as far as the next line, the word Moshe says, it's still not totally clear to me how Moshe suddenly fits in here. But in the Maimorim, there is discussion about the drawing down of Elikus from a higher level to a lower level. I think someone mentioned it yesterday. In Eidat Teira Mishpatim, he talks about Moshe Lepsik Taime, that Moshe was able to draw down energy from Atzilus into Biyah. I don't think this is a mistake that Moshe is B'Shem Havaya or something like that. I think he is talking about Moshe, that Moshe drew down from Shem Havaya into Biyah. And that's what it says in other Maimorim, that's what Adam Arishan also did. That's what he said. L'chon no, it's befitting for you to be called Havaya because you're the Oden, the master of the universe. Is basically drawing from Havaya into Adnai. That's the meaning of the Medrash. And that's why Havaya is called B'Shem Adnai, Dafke, V'lei B'Shari Shemus. Because Adnai demonstrates how Havaya is relating to Ishtamuda Oden Al Kula, that to be known as you're the master of the creator and master of the entire universe. As he said, Elokim is Malchus in Atzilus, and Adnai is how Malchus goes down into Biyah. So that's a different explanation, not what he's using here, and he's actually not going to be satisfied with this. Because then he says, Ach hayesa nira. However, it's more fitting, it seems more appropriate that Zeh Shekara B'Shem Havaya is not how Havaya relates to Adnai. But he says, Ani Havaya Shmi Havaya itself. So then the question is, why does he say Ata Oden? So there's a different explanation, but that's not the one he is going with, the Rebbe Rashab here. One more point. There's a Gemara in Brochus that says that until Avram Avinu came, God was not called Oden. So, but then we have a stira. It's a contradiction to the Medrash. The Medrash says that Odem Arishan said you're called Havaya because you're an Oden. So you could derive from that actually that Odem Arishan did not call the Eibush to Adnai. It was Avram that called him Oden. And the Rebbe Rashab explains, Yesh Lemer, that's Adnus Levad. There he's talking only Adnai, not Havaya. The Odem Arishan drew Havaya into Adnai, Havaya into Malchus, into Biyah. And Avram only revealed Adnai itself. So that's just an aside to the whole discussion here. But bottom line, the question remains, what is, the answer is rather, that it's referring to the fact that because you have related to another, Adam Arishan is saying that's why now it's appropriate to call you by a name, because now you can call you by a name as no. What name? I choose the highest name, Shema Etzem, which reveals the creator as he creates existence. That's the Rebbe Rashab's explanation. Okay, so that's a summary, and now we're up to the next paragraph. He's going to now explain, we still have to explain what's Shmoi. So what is the meaning of a name before there's another to call him by that name? So v'yuvan zeh, I'm starting from the bottom of page 1171. We'll understand this. So we have two questions really. Baruch Kvod Hashem Imkeimei, which we'll get back to, and now Shmoi. So he says, "V'yuvan zeh al pi mashakosov kalei machshavosai machshavosechem." We'll understand it according to the concept, the statement that said, your thoughts are not their thoughts. Meaning God's thought is different than the thoughts of human beings, of creations. What does that mean? What means we often use it when it comes to, unfortunately, sad moments, and we don't have an answer. We say God's thoughts are not our thoughts. We don't understand God. But the real different taich is that God's thought is different than machshavei seichem, than their thoughts, meaning human or the thoughts of creation of the creatures of the existence of the universe. What is the difference? Pirush. What does this means? Interpret Shem. Machshavas basav adam. Hevel hema. The machshav of a human being, of a person of flesh and blood, basav adam. Hevel hema. They're vacuous. The thoughts of a human being are vacuous. Hevel is like empty, or doesn't have any power. In this case, hevel, like breath, doesn't have any substance. And a thought does not help at all to create something. Nothing can be created from a thought. So a thought is like like air. It's empty. He's not talking about good thoughts and learning Torah. He's talking about the power of a thought. A thought is just a thought. It doesn't have the power to create anything. The aim male klal in thought of a human being, there's no male klal, does not help at all. That anything should come of the thought itself. If you're not going to act on it, the thought does not create anything. Even if a person of flesh and blood would concentrate, he would think in his thoughts on a certain matter for a number of hours, even if you're thinking about something, it will not make it come into being. It will not, there won't be anything come from it, and nothing will come into being. So even if you think about something for hours, it will not create anything.
Now, tracht good and sein good, and this.
First of all, tracht good and sein good doesn't mean that the thought creates something. It means that thinking good will have positive effects. V'avgam, and furthermore, in addition, and also, lo yisesif shum v'chayis ba'davar hahu al yedei machshavte milvad. I'm sorry, al yedei machshavte milvad sheyesh mitzias l'davar v'hahu gam biltish machshavte. And additionally, not only want to create something new, but it will not add any energy and vitality to an object through thinking about it, except if that object was already there before you're thinking. Let me correct myself, 1 second. I don't think he's saying that once there's something there, the machshava will help. I think he's saying that if something exists, it exists whether you think about it or not. And so thought doesn't create it, and thought also doesn't add to it. It's there it's there independent of our machshava. I want to just qualify something important because, like you mentioned, tragut v'zayngut. Then we also have an expression, machshava mayelas. Right, the beginning of Likutei Diburim, the Friedrich Rebbe brings, that thought helps. When you think about something, it helps that person. So someone who was there by the Farbrengen said to the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, where do we see that? So the Friedrich Rebbe said, look at yourself. Where were you last year? So the year before, he was in Russia, in a very dark and difficult place. And now you're here. The Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe was essentially hinting to him, is because somebody thought about you. That's why you came out of there. So how's this stem with what we're saying here? So remember, this he's coming to explain, as we'll see in a moment. He's talking about God creates something when he thinks. Our thoughts don't create reality. We don't create through thinking. Doesn't mean thinking can't help and can't have its vibes and its energy. But in comparison to God, we're going to learn in a moment that God's machshava does create something. When he thinks about something, something is created from it. We don't have that power, a human being. That's like machshavei seichem. Okay. The medibur ha'adam, from the speech of a person, yachali says a davar. From a person speaking, that could ultimately bring to something. Ukamai, the Dvar Melech Shilten, page 1172, next page.
Just before you
What's that? Let me finish. Let me just finish the sentence. And Omar Malka al Katura. What do we see? Dvar Melech Shilton, that the word of the king rules. When the king gives a command, a decree, it has a real impact. Another expression is Omar Malka Akatura. When the king speaks, Akatura, it uproots mountains. So it has power. Speech has power. The Gamzeh, even speech, Lo Yisavas Dover Chodosh. That's not creating something new. Rak yesh mi yesh. it's still yesh miyesh. It's taking one reality, and through speech, this command, this order, you can create something from it. The speech, in other words, will affect. But from the thought of a human being of flesh and blood, nothing will become created, nothing at all. Mashenkin, b'machshavti is baruch. By contrast, the thought of God, hini ma'machshava nisava akel. His thought, from his thought, everything is created. Now again, we learn about that people have bad thoughts, it creates bad angels and creates all kinds of bad energies. But that's not a creation of an existent reality. You can't create yesh ma'ayin by thinking. You can think about a business, you can think about a project, you can think about anything. From that is not going to happen. The project will not happen from thought. You need planning, strategy, giving orders, and actually bring it into action. By the Eibishter, thought alone creates. That's the key point that he's making here. So it's not taking away from the power of thought. We know thought has a big effect on people. But Tanya talks about machshava dibur ma'aseh, that you control your thought, but not in the form of creation. Our thought does not create. God's thought creates, actually creates. He doesn't need more than thought. He thinks about something, poof, he can create a reality from that. We don't have that power, that a thought creates a reality. As I said again, it creates energy. Every thought gives off all kinds of power, but it doesn't have the power to create like the Eibishter. That's the machshavei seicha. Okay, he's going to continue with this discussion, but you want to ask anything?
Yeah, does milvad mean besides the point that this thing exists independent of his thought?
That's how I touched it, yeah. Yeah. Or you could also touch, now that I read it again, no, I think you could touch it also simpler. That additionally, no energy and vitality is added in the thing through machshavte milvad. The truth is, it should have said bilvad then. But you could type machshavte milvad alone. Why? Sheyesh mitzias l'dover ha'u gam bilti machshavte. So I think milvad can go back to the word machshavte, not further. I read it before the other way. You can read it both ways, to be honest. But the bottom line is, he's saying that thought not only doesn't create, it also doesn't add anything. So if you have, let's say, this table is here, someone built this table. My thought did not bring this table into this room, did not create it, and my thought doesn't change the properties of the table, period. God thinks about a table, and it creates a table. That's the simple way of explaining what he's saying right now. Okay? Like it says in Eitz Chaim, that is all. When it arose in his seamless and shapeless desire to emanate. So that's all it says. It doesn't say anything else. All he needed was a ratzon, which he's equating here with machshava. Sometimes he say ola b'ritzene, ola b'machshavte. He said it earlier too. The bottom of page 1170 he said ola b'machshave, machshavte v'ritzene is baruch. So all practical purposes now, ratzon and machshava. Another expression, u'b'zoyar, kad solik, b're'use l'mivra alma. When it arose in his desire, re'use is ratzon, l'mivra alma, to create worlds. So again, the ratzon alone, that's what created. So now, through this desire that arose, the worlds were mamish created. Now, of course, you could ask the question, so what's the role of the Asara Ma'amoris? Why then do we need Dvar Hashem Shamayim Nasu? Dvar Hashem. And Asara Ma'amoris Nivra Elam. If Machshava alone. So I think he's going to address this shortly. But even if he does, I think he will, but I'll just say, Dibur makes it into a reality of an independent reality. If you only relied on God's thought, existence would exist, but it would be completely encompassed in God's thought, meaning it wouldn't have independence. Dibur creates a detachment, so to speak. Like we learned earlier, dibur is lezulas. When you speak, another can hear you. When you think, it's only to yourself. So God's thought has the power to create, but it does not have the power to create. But on a logical, of course, God can do anything. But logically, you need dibur to actually create an independent consciousness. So machshava creates, but independent consciousness emerges through the dibur. That the machshava of Hashem turns into a dibur, which then turns into a ma'aseh. I think he's going to say this, but I just wanted to spell it out in case. Like he says it, writes in Zohar, one thought, with one thought, all the worlds were created. Remember, machshavas ano emlech, I explained at length. The thought, ano emlech, I will rule, I shall rule. So it's not about ruling, it's about creating another. So that machshava of ano emlech, that one thought created everything. And furthermore, or on the contrary, not only is it machshava has the power to create, but the primary force of a new entity is when it's nisava b'machshava, when it emerges and becomes a reality in God's thought. That's the main chiddush. Ukiyadua, as it's known, the ischachus is the ischachus ha'isavus u'ba'elam habriya. That the ischachus, the chiddush of isavus, where something new really emerges that was not there before, not like atzilus, which is an emanation. He says that's ikri isavus ischachus adavar shem b'chshavah is to do the ischachus isavus u'ba'elam habriya. Is in the world of Bria. Shal Shem Zen, Bria. That's why it's called Bria. It means a creation, a new creation. Shehu Loshen is Chachus. Because Bria is from the term, refers to his Chachus. Ukamai in Bria, Yivra Hashem. This is a pasuk in Kairach, when Moshe speaks about opening the earth in Bria Yivra Hashem. So you see from there that Bria is connected to creating something new. The Yetzirah Hurak is Galus Hayesh. So the main chiddush happens in Bria, creation of something new. Yetzirah is already his Galus Hayesh. There it's already being formed. It's a shape and form. So the first thing you need is the creation of substance. And then comes his Galus Hayesh, that begins to be revealed, the substance of this thing that was created. V'yadua, and it's known, the Bria v'yitzira he machshava v'dibur. Bria and yitzira are thought and speech. So speech follows thought. The thought is the first place where everything emerges, the first thought. In the case of God, that thought creates. And speech shapes it into what it's born. It reveals it. So machshava creates, bria, and dibur reveals what was created. Like when a person is about to begin to convey an idea, when you first conceive of an idea, the ischachus ha'esius, the first place where the letters that you're going to use to express yourself, they all begin in machshava. Before you gave the idea any thought, there's no letters altogether. There's no expression. So when you want to, let's say, give a speech or write an article or convey any idea, it all begins, first step, the thought process. You begin to think about it. Thinking creates letters. Those letters will now become more manifest until they are expressed in dibur, until they come out in a very tangible way. But it all originates in thought. A person who speaks without thought, that's usually someone who's intoxicated. After the letters are formed in your thought, afterwards, in speech, it only reveals those words that you already conceived of beforehand. Then he adds in the parentheses, and when these words become revealed, they become more tangible, more concrete. So even though they become more concrete and tangible in words and speech, but their actual novelty, the creation of these, the conception of the very words is in machshava, in thought. So in thought, it's more subtle, it's not as tangible, but it all originates from thought. So you see from this that the real ischachus is a machshava, the real bria is a machshava, and then afterwards it comes out b'dibur. U'kamoy kain, that's a muscle from us, where the words begin in the thoughts and then they go into speech more revealed. It says, U'kamoy kain hu b'yisavas elam, is the same thing is in the creation of the worlds. The ikir is savusum shalem u'machshava. The primary creation of theirs is in thought. U'kamoy baruch sha'amar v'hoya elam. Like when we say baruch sha'amar v'hoya elam, baruch, blessed is the one that said, and then v'hoya elam that spoke, and v'hoya elam was a world. So he's speaking speech. So look what he says. The amirahu belev. The word baruch sha'amar is not speech. He's saying it's amir belev. It's speech in your heart. In other words, it's more God's thought. Now, how can you prove it? How does he know that? Baruch sha'amar v'hoya elam. I think another Maimonim talks about this. He proves how Baruch sha'amar, because afterwards in Baruch sha'amar, we say words, we talk about words. So this is amira belev. The speaking, when you say amira, it's talking about in the heart, which is like in thought. The amira nisava elam. And you see from the amira, from this speech in your heart, in God's heart, created the world, v'ikra isavas. And that's the primary place of creation.
We learned about this and it's Chassidus and the astounding when we daven, when we say Baruch Shaman. I never forgot that. So this then makes sense that it's machshava.
Yeah. V'zehu breishis nami maimerhu, and this is also the meaning when we say Asara b'amaris nivra elam, and the question is, what do you mean Asara? We only count 9. So the Gemara answers, breishis nami maimerhu. Breishis is also a maimer. The word maimer is a statement. V'hu maimer sosum. But it's a maimer, a concealed maimer. In other words, it's not like you hear a kia, which is revealed in words. Bereshis is a maimer sosum. It's concealed. It's covered up. Hakoil kol ates maimoris, and which encompasses all the 9 other statements. Sheba maimer zeh nesava mamish. Because in this maimer bereshis, like he said, in this thought of bereshis, which is a maimer belev, that was where the actual creation happens. Rak shenifra tu acher kach. Only afterwards they come out the details. They're specified afterwards b'hates maimoris in these 9 statements. He and so on. So what does all this tell us? Which means that the beginning, the head, the conception of all these creations is in thought. And afterwards, it's specified and spelled out in speech. Because when they were created in machshava and thought, they were in a very subtle and ethereal, refined place. High, much higher than their existence as they are now. In other words, machshava created, but the creation is a very subtle state. Then they're specified and broken down in speech to give them mitzias, substance and definition, more concrete, not as abstract and dak v'ruchni. Ubechlolos elemis, and the general worlds, where are we talking here? Machshava zu he beginners machshava gedume da'ak. So before he said machshava is bria and dibur is yitzira, but what's bria de klolos in macrocosm? He says this machshava is what we call the primordial thought of Adam Kadmon, of the primordial man. Shaze'ian, that's the level. Kad solik berusa limivra alma. What he said on the top of the page from Zoyar, when it arose in his desire and to create the world, that's referring in general to Ak. Yeah. With this thought, Nivru v'nisavu kola elamis, were created and brought into being all the worlds, mereish kol dargin at sheif kol dargin, from the highest levels to the lowest levels. So then why do you need other worlds? Why is Ak not enough? But in Ak, it's like in thought. God is creating a thought, but it's still not substance as we can relate to it. So it's not a Metzias Davar as a substantial entity. Ukamaimer, like the statement, V'kulam niskorim b'skira achas. In Ak, they're all there in like one vision. Kulam niskorim, God gazes upon them in one gaze. It's like a bird's eye view. The whole existence is in that type of one state. In that state, they all are one. They're all equalized. Atzilus and Asiya, because they're not yet broken down through dibur into specifics. So yes, there's a creation, but the creation is like one nucleus. Like think of it, one cell. It's all there, but it's not yet broken down into details that are tangible and concrete.
It's like klal and prat, like sort of.
I wouldn't use kal and prat because it could mean other things. I would use more a seed and a tree, if you wish, or a one cell before it starts splitting, or like a nebulous hiyuli state. There's a lot of ways you can explain it, but bottom line is like think of a raw piece of clay that has all kinds of shapes that will come from it, but right now it's one entity. When God created, everything was created, but it was all in one nucleus, in one nucleus which is very nebulous and amorphous. Then he says, and afterwards it was broken down in detail. That it like leaves, exits, and reveals outside of this thought. So the thought is one solidified, unified picture. I mentioned one cell. When a child is conceived, it's still one cell. That cell will then split and break down, and over the months will develop into a fully blown child. Details. But the creation did not happen in the 9th month by birth. It didn't happen in the 5th month. It happened the moment of conception. Everything was there in one ball, in one concentrated point. And then afterwards, Yitziv is Gal's Chutzl Machshavazol Liyas B'Bchinas Mitzias Kol Elam, that there should be the actual substance existence of each world, of each domain, K'Maishala B'Ritzeni is Baruch, as it arose in God's desire, where He created all in one concentrated point, and then afterwards it breaks down step by step. We'll stop here, but he's going to now explain how this translates into the language we spoke earlier. That in general, he's going to say this is the level of Malchus of Ein Sof, the way it comes after the Tzimtzum. and then how that breaks down into actual details. Remember, God envisioned existence in Malchus of Ein Sof, but it's still, there's Malchus of Ein Sof after the Tzimtzum, before the Tzimtzum, but I don't want to jump. We'll learn that tomorrow. So we'll stop here. Went through most of page 1172, discussing the process of how creation happens, which is going to come back to explain to us Hayu Shmei Belvad and Baruch Kvoid Hashem Imkeme, and ultimately the Kav, the Chitzenius and Pnimius HaKav, the two dimensions that relates to existence and that which is above existence. So the Rabbi Rashab is elaborating on this process now.